Some people look at a patient man and decide he must be harmless. They see him stay calm, forgive a few things, and avoid unnecessary arguments. So they start believing they can do whatever they want around him. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, believed that about me. She stopped believing it after one long weekend. My name is Robert Hale. I was 67 years old when this happened, and I had been living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for nearly 4 decades. By then, I knew the city almost as well as I knew my own house. I knew which streets became crowded before 8 in the morning, which traffic lights seemed to stay red forever, and how quickly the desert heat could rise once the sun cleared the mountains. I lived alone in a quiet neighborhood on the west side of town. My house sat on Juniper Ridge Drive, a street where most mornings looked exactly the same. Sprinklers clicked across dry lawns. Garage doors opened. People backed out of their driveways on their way to work. Nothing exciting ever happened there. At least, nothing was supposed to. That Friday morning, I had one important thing planned, an appointment with a heart specialist. The appointment was scheduled for 9:10 at a medical office near Montgomery Boulevard. It had taken me almost 2 months to get that slot. I had called 3 times, spent what felt like hours listening to recorded music, and rejected 2 dates that were nearly 10 weeks away. When they finally offered me Friday morning, I accepted immediately. I wrote the appointment on the calendar hanging beside my refrigerator. Then I circled it twice with a red pen. The night before, I placed my insurance card in my wallet, set my keys beside the coffee maker, and laid out a clean shirt and jeans. I was not going to be late. I woke up at 6:40, showered, shaved, and made myself eggs and toast. After breakfast, I poured coffee into a travel mug and checked the clock. It was 8:05. Plenty of time. I stepped outside, locked the front door behind me, and walked toward the driveway. Then I stopped. My truck was gone. For a few seconds, I simply stood there staring at the empty space. I owned a dark blue 2020 Chevrolet Silverado. I had parked it in the same spot every evening for years, facing the street with the driver's side close to the garage. That morning, however, all I saw was bare concrete and a few dark marks where the tires normally rested. At first, my mind refused to understand what my eyes were showing me. I looked toward the curb, thinking maybe I had parked there for some reason. Nothing. I opened the garage, even though I clearly remembered leaving the truck outside. The garage contained my workbench, an old bicycle, and several storage boxes. No truck. I walked back into the house and checked the kitchen counter. My keys were gone too. That was when the confusion turned into something colder. Someone had entered my home, taken my keys, and driven away in my vehicle. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police. Before I could dial, a message appeared on the screen. It was from Melissa. "Morning, Robert. Missing something." She had added a laughing face at the end. I read the message twice. Then a third time. Melissa was married to my only son, Eric. They lived about 15 minutes away, in Rio Rancho. She had been part of the family for 6 years, and during that time, I had helped them more often than I could count. I had paid part of their closing costs when they bought their house. I had helped Eric repair the back fence. I had watched their 2 boys whenever Melissa wanted a weekend away. I had even lent her my truck twice when she had asked properly. But that morning, she had not asked. She had simply taken it. I walked back inside, placed my coffee on the counter, and called Eric. He did not answer. I tried again. Still nothing. So I sent him a message. "Where is my truck?" I did not add a greeting. I did not add a question mark. I was not interested in polite conversation. I waited in the kitchen, staring at the phone. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Eric did not respond. Melissa's message remained on my screen, that smiling little face sitting at the end like she thought the whole thing was funny. Finally, I called her. She answered after several rings. "Hey, Robert," she said brightly. I heard traffic in the background. Tires humming over pavement. Wind slipping through an open window. Someone was speaking behind her, but I could not make out the words. "Where is my truck?" I asked. She laughed softly. "Oh, don't sound like that. Eric had to leave early for work, and my parents are flying in this morning. My car has been making a strange rattling sound, and I didn't want to risk driving it all the way to the airport. So you took my Silverado. I borrowed it. You took it. There was a short pause. Well, yes, but I knew you wouldn't mind. You knew that. Robert, it was sitting in your driveway. I looked through the front window at the empty concrete. That is where vehicles usually sit when they belong to someone. She sighed, as if I were making the conversation more difficult than necessary. I only need it for a few hours. My parents are landing soon, and they have a lot of luggage. Your truck has more room. Did you ask me? Another pause. I didn't think it was a big deal. That wasn't my question. She became quieter. No. I checked the time. 8:19. I have an appointment with a cardiologist at 9:10. Oh. That was all she said. Not an apology. Not an offer to turn around. Just one careless word. I waited nearly 2 months for this appointment, I continued. Bring the truck back immediately. Robert, I'm already heading toward the airport. Turn around. My parents will be waiting. Then they can wait. Her cheerful tone disappeared. I can't just leave them there. You should have considered that before taking a vehicle that does not belong to you. She exhaled slowly, and I could hear the irritation in it. I'll return it around lunchtime. That is not what I said. You can call a taxi, can't you? Or move the appointment. I stood there in complete silence. That sentence told me more about Melissa than the missing truck did. She knew I had waited almost 2 months. She knew the appointment mattered. Yet in her mind, the solution was simple. I should rearrange my life because she had decided my property was available to her. Have it back before noon, I said. Fine. Not this evening. Not tomorrow. Before noon. Yes, Robert. She said it in the tone people use when they want to end an annoying conversation. Then she hung up. I still had to reach the doctor's office, so I called my neighbor, Frank Dawson. Frank was 71, retired from the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department, and had lived across the street from me for 12 years. He answered immediately. Frank, I need a ride. Where to? Montgomery Boulevard. When? Now. I'll be outside in 5 minutes. That was Frank. No questions. No speeches. No complaints. 5 minutes later, his silver Buick stopped in front of my house. During the drive, I told him what had happened. He kept his eyes on the road and listened until I finished. She entered your house and took the keys? He asked. She has a spare house key for emergencies. And she never called first. Not once. Frank shook his head. That's not borrowing, Robert. I know. That's taking. I know that too. He drove me to the appointment and waited in the parking lot the entire time. When I returned, he said nothing about the delay. He just drove me home. At 11:45, I sat beside the front window waiting for my truck to appear. No truck. At noon, the driveway was still empty. I called Melissa. Voicemail. At 12:20, I tried Eric again. This time, he finally answered with a text. Dad, calm down. She's helping her parents get settled. You'll have the truck back tonight. At the end of the message, he added, LOL. I stared at those 3 letters for a long time. Calm down. My own son had told me to calm down after his wife entered my home, took my keys, stole my truck, nearly made me miss a medical appointment, ignored the time she promised to return it, and stopped answering her phone. I did not reply. I sat in my chair and felt the anger inside me change. It did not disappear. It hardened. That was the moment I understood something important. Melissa did not believe she had done anything wrong. And even worse, Eric believed I would eventually let it go. They thought they knew exactly what kind of man I was. They were about to discover how badly they had misjudged me. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon sitting in my living room, looking out through the front window every few minutes. Every time I heard an engine outside, I expected to see my Silverado pulling into the driveway. Every single time, it was someone else. A delivery van. The mail carrier. One of my neighbors heading home from work. Anything except my truck. At 12:45, I called Melissa again. Straight to voicemail. I tried once more 15 minutes later. Still nothing. By 1 o'clock, I wasn't even surprised anymore. She had promised noon. Then Eric casually moved it to tonight, like changing the deadline somehow made everything acceptable. What bothered me wasn't only the truck anymore. It was the complete lack of respect. Neither of them had apologized. Neither of them had asked if missing my appointment would have caused problems. Neither of them seemed to understand that what Melissa had done wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. She had decided my property was available whenever it suited her. Around 2 that afternoon, Frank walked across the street carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you could use another one," he said. "You figured right." We sat on my back patio where the shade made the August heat bearable. He listened while I showed him Eric's message. Frank read it twice before handing my phone back. "Relax. LOL," he read quietly. He shook his head. If my son had sent me that after his wife took my truck, he'd have regretted it before sunset. "I honestly don't think Eric realizes how serious this is." "No," Frank replied. "He realizes. He just assumes you'll forgive it." That sentence stayed with me. Because he was right. Over the years, I'd helped them countless times. When they needed money for unexpected repairs, I helped. When their oldest boy broke his arm and they needed someone to stay with the younger one, I canceled my own plans. When Eric lost his job for nearly 3 months, I quietly paid 2 of their mortgage payments without telling anyone else in the family. Every single time there had been a problem, I stepped in. Maybe I'd made things too easy. Maybe somewhere along the way kindness had turned into expectation. Frank leaned back in his chair. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. If a stranger took your truck Friday morning and still had it this afternoon, what would you do?" "I'd report it stolen." "And what's different now?" "It's family." He nodded once. "I understand." Then he looked directly at me. "But the law doesn't change because somebody married your son." Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The only sound came from sprinklers running somewhere down the block. At exactly 6 p.m., I walked back to the front window. Still nothing. I called Melissa again. Voicemail. I called Eric. This time he answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded completely relaxed. Like he was calling to ask how my day had been. "Where's my truck?" "They're just finishing dinner." "Dinner?" Melissa wanted to show her parents around Old Town. "They're having a nice time." "In my truck?" "Yeah." He actually said it like that, as though those 2 words explained everything. "Eric." "What?" "Your wife promised she'd have it back before noon." "I know. It's 6 o'clock." "I know. So why isn't she driving home?" There was a pause. "Dad, they've only got a few days here." So she didn't want to rush them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did it ever occur to either of you that maybe I wanted my own vehicle back? "We'll bring it over tonight." "What time?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "No." I took a slow breath. "Eric, listen carefully." "I'm listening." "Your wife took my truck without permission." "I get that." "No. You clearly don't." He stayed quiet. "I told her to return it before noon." "I know." She ignored me. "Dad." "No. Let me finish. My appointment almost had to be canceled because of what she did." I said, "I'm sorry." "No, actually you didn't." Silence. Then, finally, "Okay, I'm sorry." It sounded forced, like someone apologizing only because they wanted the conversation to end. "I'll see it tonight," he said. "I promise." I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But something told me not to. By 9 o'clock that evening, my driveway was still empty. No phone call. No text. Nothing. At 9:18, another message from Eric appeared. "Sorry, Dad. We stayed out later than expected. They'll bring it tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. Another promise. Another deadline. Another excuse. I didn't answer. Saturday came. 7 o'clock. No truck. 8. Nothing. 9. Still nothing. At 10:30 Eric called. He sounded almost cheerful. "Morning, Dad." "What is it?" "So, Melissa's parents really want to spend today exploring Albuquerque." "I don't care. They've never been here." "I still don't care." She was wondering if she could just keep the truck through the weekend. For several seconds, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood him. "Repeat that." She wanted to know if... "I heard you." He stopped talking. I stood in my kitchen looking at the empty driveway through the window. Friday. Saturday. Now they wanted Sunday too. It was unbelievable. "Eric." "Yeah." "Stop talking." He went silent. Your wife entered my home without permission. Silence. She took my truck. Silence. She ignored every request to return it. Silence again. And now you're asking if she can keep it even longer. Finally, he answered quietly. I guess, when you put it that way. When I put it the way it actually happened. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Because every word I had spoken was true. Don't do anything drastic, he said after a long pause. I looked out at the driveway one more time. My patience had officially run out. I won't, I answered calmly. Then I ended the call. A few minutes later, I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found Frank's number. He answered before the second ring. Everything all right? No. What happened? They've decided they want to keep my truck through Sunday. Frank didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said quietly, Robert, I think it's time we stop calling this borrowing. I agree. And I think it's time you start treating it exactly for what it is. I already knew what he meant. Deep down, I'd known since Friday morning. I had simply hoped my own family would come to their senses before it reached that point. They hadn't. Now it was my turn to make a decision. And once I made it, there would be no going back. After hanging up with Eric, I stayed in my kitchen for a long time without moving. The house was completely quiet. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. Outside, neighbors were mowing their lawns, washing their cars, and enjoying an ordinary Saturday morning. Meanwhile, my own son and his wife were driving around New Mexico in my truck as if it belonged to them. The more I thought about it, the calmer I became. That may sound strange, but real anger doesn't always get louder. Sometimes it goes completely silent. I picked up my phone and called Frank again. He answered immediately. You make up your mind? I think I have. What do you need? I've got a legal question. I'm listening. If somebody takes your vehicle without permission. I paused. What is that called? Frank didn't answer right away. He chose his words carefully. If we're talking strictly under the law, that's unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. Depending on the facts, prosecutors can treat it very seriously. And if the owner repeatedly asks for it back, that doesn't help the person driving it. He let that sink in before continuing. Robert, you got text messages asking for your truck back. I do. They ignored you. Every single time. They've had it for almost 2 full days. That's right. Frank sighed. I spent 32 years wearing a badge. I've seen families destroy relationships because they thought blood made them immune from consequences. I don't want to destroy anything. No, you just want your truck. I want my truck, and I want them to understand that my property isn't theirs simply because we're related. Frank didn't argue. I think you're justified. I thanked him and hung up. Then I walked into my office and opened the small notebook I keep inside my desk drawer. I've always been the kind of man who writes things down. Dates, appointments, expenses, phone numbers. That afternoon, I started a new page. Friday, 8:07 a.m. Truck discovered missing. 8:09. Text from Melissa. 8:18. Phone call requesting immediate return. Promise made for noon. 12 o'clock. Truck not returned. 12:20. Eric says, tonight. 9:18 p.m. Promise changed to Saturday morning. Saturday. 10:31 a.m. Request to keep truck through the weekend. I wrote every detail exactly as it happened. Every phone call. Every text. Every promise. Every broken promise. Looking back now, I'm glad I did. At the time, I wasn't trying to build evidence. I simply wanted an accurate record. Around 4 that afternoon, another text from Eric appeared. Dad, please don't be upset. Melissa's parents wanted to see Santa Fe tomorrow before flying home Monday. I read it twice. Then another message followed. We'll bring your truck Monday afternoon. Monday. They had done it again. Without asking me. Without even pretending my opinion mattered. They had simply moved the deadline another 48 hours. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for several seconds. Finally, I typed 4 words. No. Bring it back. He read the message almost immediately. 3 little dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then came back again. Finally, his reply arrived. Please be reasonable. Reasonable. I couldn't help shaking my head. I'd spent nearly 3 days being the only reasonable person involved. I had asked politely. I had explained why I needed my truck. I had reminded them repeatedly. Meanwhile, they had ignored every request I'd made. Somehow, I was the unreasonable one. I didn't answer. About an hour later my phone rang. Melissa. I accepted the call. Robert. She sounded irritated. Not embarrassed. Not apologetic. Irritated. What? My parents really wanted to see Santa Fe. I don't care. You don't have to be rude. I wasn't rude Friday morning when you walked into my house and took my truck. Silence. You've completely blown this out of proportion. Have I? Yes. It's just a vehicle. No, I corrected her. It's my vehicle. You weren't using it. I was planning to. You could have rented one if it was that important. For a moment, I honestly wondered whether I'd heard her correctly. You think I should rent a truck so my family can keep driving mine? Another long silence. Then she answered. When you say it like that, that's because that's exactly what happened. She tried a different approach. My parents are going home Monday. I hope they enjoy the flight. They've already planned tomorrow. That's unfortunate. You really won't let us keep it. I almost laughed. Let them? She still believed this was a negotiation. You've already had it for 2 days without permission. I said I was sorry. No. You said I was overreacting. Silence. You told me to reschedule a specialist appointment I'd waited weeks for. Another silence. Then she spoke quietly. I didn't think it was such a big deal. There it is. What? The truth. She didn't understand. You never thought about me at all. She had no answer. I ended the call. That evening I sat on my back porch watching the sunset over the Sandia Mountains. Normally, I loved that view. It reminded me why I'd never left Albuquerque. But that night, I barely noticed it. I was thinking about something Frank had said earlier. Family doesn't place anyone above the law. I'd spent the entire weekend hoping Eric or Melissa would do the right thing. Instead, every conversation had made things worse. Every promise had been broken. Every excuse had grown bigger. Around 8 o'clock, I picked up my phone one last time. I opened my contacts. Scrolled down to Frank's number. Then I stopped. No, I said quietly to myself. Not Frank. This wasn't a question for my retired neighbor anymore. This was a matter for the people whose job it was to handle situations exactly like this. I searched for another number. The non-emergency line for the Albuquerque Police Department. My thumb rested above the call button. Once I pressed it, everything would change. And deep inside, I knew Melissa still believed I would never do it. She was about to learn how wrong she was. For nearly a minute, I stared at the number on my phone without pressing it. I wasn't second-guessing myself. I was making sure I wasn't acting out of anger. There's a big difference between making a decision while you're furious and making one after you've had time to think. I'd spent almost 3 full days thinking. Melissa had entered my home without permission. She had taken my truck. She had ignored every request to return it. She had broken every promise she made. And Eric had stood beside her through all of it. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a choice. I pressed the call button. A dispatcher answered after only a few rings. Albuquerque Police Department. How may I help you? My name is Robert Hale, I said calmly. I'd like to report my vehicle as being used without my permission. The dispatcher asked several questions. The make and model, the color, the license plate, the last time I personally had possession of it. Then came the question I already knew was coming. Do you know who currently has the vehicle? Yes. Who? My daughter-in-law. There was no reaction in the dispatcher's voice. She simply continued writing. Did you give her permission to use it? No. Has she been instructed to return it? Several times. When was the first request? Friday morning. And she still has the vehicle? Yes. She paused for a second before speaking again. An officer will need to speak with you to complete the report. I understand. Less than an hour later, Officer Daniel Brooks pulled into my driveway. He looked to be somewhere in his early 40s, professional without being cold. We sat at my kitchen table while he listened to everything from the beginning. I told him about the doctor's appointment, the missing truck, Melissa's text, every phone call, every promise, every excuse. Then I handed him my phone. He spent several minutes reading the messages without interrupting me. Finally, he looked up. You asked for the vehicle back multiple times. I did. And she acknowledged those requests. Yes. Has she ever claimed you gave permission? No. Quite the opposite. He nodded. I appreciate you documenting everything. I've always believed in keeping records. It makes my job easier. He finished typing his report before sliding a form across the table. I'll need your signature here. I read every line before signing. Once I handed the paper back, Officer Brooks closed his folder. The vehicle will be entered into the system. What happens next? If an officer encounters it, they'll investigate the circumstances immediately. And if they find Melissa driving it, they'll handle it according to department policy. He stood up. Before leaving, he looked me in the eye. Mr. Hale. Yes. Family situations are never easy. No. But from everything you've shown me today, you've given the vehicle's driver every opportunity to return it voluntarily. I tried. It appears you did. He shook my hand and left. The moment his patrol car disappeared down the street, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Friday morning. Peace. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Just peace. I'd done everything I reasonably could. The rest was no longer my responsibility. Sunday passed quietly. No phone calls. No texts. No truck. I spent most of the afternoon cleaning the garage and organizing old tools. Every now and then I'd glance toward the driveway. Still empty. Late Sunday evening, another message appeared from Eric. Dad, we'll see you tomorrow. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Monday morning began like any other. I woke up before sunrise, brewed fresh coffee, and carried the mug to the kitchen table. The house felt unusually calm. At exactly 7:12, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Hale? Speaking. This is Officer Martinez with Albuquerque Police. Yes. I'm calling regarding your Chevrolet Silverado. I took a slow sip of coffee. What about it? We've located the vehicle. I see. There are currently 3 individuals with it. I understand. We'll need you to come to the location to verify ownership. I'll be there. As soon as I ended the call, another call came in. Melissa. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was completely different from every conversation we'd had all weekend. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the impatience. She sounded terrified. Robert. I'm here. There are police officers everywhere. I know. They're saying your truck was reported. It was. You called the police? Yes. Why would you do that? For a second, I honestly didn't know how to answer. The question itself was unbelievable. Because you took my truck. I was bringing it back today. After 4 days. My parents are standing here. I know. They're scared. So was I Friday morning when I walked outside and realized my truck had disappeared. She started talking faster. This is all a misunderstanding. No, it isn't. You knew where it was. I also knew it wasn't where it belonged. She inhaled sharply. You could have called me. I did. Several times. You didn't have to involve the police. I asked for my truck back Friday. Silence. I asked again Friday afternoon. More silence. I asked Saturday. Nothing. I asked Sunday. Still nothing. You ignored every request. Her breathing became heavier. Robert. Yes. I'm sorry. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard since any of this began. But it had arrived only after flashing police lights entered the picture. I wasn't interested anymore. The officers will explain everything when I arrive. Please. She sounded close to crying. My parents don't understand what's happening. Neither did I when I found my driveway empty Friday morning. I ended the call. As I picked up my keys from the kitchen counter, I looked out the front window. For the first time in 4 days, I knew exactly where my truck was. And in less than an hour, everyone else was finally going to understand exactly why this had happened. When I arrived at the shopping center parking lot on the north side of Albuquerque, I spotted my truck before I even saw the police cars. My dark blue Silverado was sitting exactly where it should have been, except it wasn't in my driveway. It was boxed in by 2 patrol vehicles with their emergency lights flashing. Melissa stood beside the driver's door with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her face was pale, and even from a distance I could tell she'd been crying. Her parents stood several feet away, whispering nervously to one another. Eric had just pulled into the parking lot in his own sedan and was hurrying toward them. Officer Martinez noticed me first. "You must be Mr. Hale." "That's me." He shook my hand. "Can you confirm this is your vehicle?" "Yes." He compared the VIN with the registration I had brought from home, then nodded. "Everything matches." While another officer continued speaking with Melissa, Martinez motioned me toward the side. "We've already heard everyone's version of events," he said. "I appreciate that. They claimed they intended to return the truck today." "I've heard that before." He gave me a slight nod. "They also acknowledged you requested its return several times." "I did. I've seen the messages." That alone told me he had reviewed everything carefully. From across the parking lot, Melissa looked at me. For the first time since Friday morning, she didn't look annoyed. She looked frightened. She slowly walked over. "Robert." I waited. "I'm so sorry." I said nothing. "I never thought any of this would happen." "I know. I honestly thought you'd be upset for a while, and then we'd all move on." There it was. The truth. She hadn't expected consequences. She'd expected forgiveness. She wiped tears from her face. "My parents are embarrassed." I looked toward them. They looked embarrassed too. "But that wasn't my responsibility. I warned you on Friday." "I know. I warned you again Friday afternoon." "I know. I asked Saturday." She lowered her head. "I know. I asked Sunday." "I know. And every single time you ignored me." She couldn't argue with any of it, because every word was true. At that moment Eric reached us. "Dad." His voice was quiet, very different from the casual messages he'd been sending all weekend. "Can we please talk?" "We are talking." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't think you'd actually report it." I noticed. "I thought." He stopped. "You thought what?" "I thought things would calm down." I couldn't help shaking my head. "Eric, your wife entered my house, took my truck without permission, ignored every request to return it, and kept moving the deadline whenever it suited her." "I know." "No." I looked him directly in the eye. "You know it now." He didn't respond. Officer Martinez walked back over carrying a tablet. "Mr. Hale." "Yes." "Your vehicle will need to be processed according to department policy before it can be released." "How long?" "Not very." He glanced toward Melissa. "There will also be towing and impound procedures." Melissa looked confused. "What does that mean?" The officer answered professionally. "Once a vehicle has been entered into the system and recovered, department procedures require it to be transported to the impound facility before it's released to the registered owner." Her eyes widened. "So it gets towed?" "Yes." "And who pays for that?" "The investigation will determine responsibility." I already knew the answer. Officer Martinez had explained enough for me to understand exactly where this was heading. A tow truck arrived less than 15 minutes later. I watched as my Silverado was carefully loaded onto the flatbed. It bothered me seeing it hauled away, but I also understood why it had to happen. Rules exist for everyone, even family. Melissa stared at the truck as if she couldn't believe what she was watching. "This is insane," she whispered. "No," I answered quietly. "This is what happens when someone refuses to return property that isn't theirs." She didn't reply. One of the officers handed her several documents to review. Eric stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. His expression changed with every page. Confusion, concern, then regret. Finally, he walked back over to me. "Dad." "What?" "I should have made her bring it back Friday." "Yes." "I should have listened." "Yes." "I kept thinking it wasn't worth making a big fight over." "It stopped being about the truck a long time ago." He looked at me. "What do you mean?" "It became about respect." He didn't answer, because deep down he understood. The truck could have been returned Friday morning with one simple apology. Instead, pride had stretched one bad decision into 4 miserable days. As the tow truck disappeared onto the main road, Officer Martinez handed me a business card. You'll receive instructions for retrieving your vehicle tomorrow. Thank you. If anyone contacts you regarding the report, cooperate as you already have. I will. He shook my hand again before leaving. Within minutes, the parking lot was almost empty. Melissa's parents quietly got into Eric's car. Neither of them looked at me. Melissa remained standing beside the curb. She looked completely different from the confident woman who had laughed on the phone Friday morning. Reality had finally caught up with her. And somehow, I had a feeling the hardest part for her still hadn't begun. I drove home in complete silence. For the first time since Friday morning, I wasn't wondering where my truck was. I knew exactly where it was. Locked inside the city impound lot until the paperwork was finished. Oddly enough, that gave me more peace than watching someone else drive it around town. At least now nobody could treat it like it belonged to them. Tuesday morning, just after 8, I arrived at the impound facility with my registration, driver's license, and the paperwork Officer Martinez had given me the day before. The employee behind the counter checked my documents before disappearing into the back office. A few minutes later, she returned. Mr. Ale? Yes. Your vehicle is ready for release. Good. She handed me several forms to sign. As I finished the last signature, she looked up. You're not responsible for the recovery and storage fees. I figured as much. The investigating officers determined the vehicle was being used without your authorization. I understand. She nodded. Those costs will be assigned elsewhere. I thanked her and walked outside. Seeing my Silverado again felt strangely satisfying. It hadn't been damaged. No dents. No scratches. It looked exactly the way it had when I parked it outside my house 4 days earlier. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment. The familiar smell of leather and motor oil filled the cab. Home. That's exactly what it felt like. On the drive back, I stopped at a hardware store and bought the strongest steering wheel lock they carried. Then I drove to a locksmith and scheduled the locks on my front door to be rekeyed. Melissa had never forced her way into my home. She'd used the emergency key I'd trusted her with. That wasn't going to happen again. By lunchtime, the locksmith had finished. He handed me 3 new keys. What happened? He asked casually. Let's just say I learned that emergency keys have a way of becoming everyday keys if you leave them with the wrong person. He smiled politely, unaware of how true those words really were. When I got home, I parked my truck in its usual spot. I locked the steering wheel. Then I stood in the driveway for several seconds just looking at it, exactly where it belonged. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. Eric. I answered. Dad. He sounded exhausted. I wanted to come by. You can. Can we talk? We should. He arrived about 30 minutes later. He came alone. The moment he stepped inside, I noticed how different he looked. He hadn't slept much. His shoulders were slumped. The confidence he'd carried all weekend had disappeared. We sat at the kitchen table. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. I messed up. Yes. I should have stopped all this Friday. Yes. I kept thinking Melissa would return the truck. But she didn't. No. And every time I called, you asked me to relax. He lowered his head. I know. I almost missed a medical appointment. I know. You laughed in a text message. I know. I defended her, because she's my wife. I understand that. He looked surprised. You do? Of course. I would have defended your mother too. He gave a small nod. But defending your spouse doesn't mean ignoring what's right. His eyes stayed on the table. I see that now. I leaned back in my chair. Eric, this was never about the value of the truck. I know. It was about respect. He nodded again. I understand. I helped you too, because I wanted to. I know. I never expected anything back. I know. But somewhere along the way, helping became expected. He didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. I think we started taking you for granted. There it was. The sentence I'd been waiting to hear. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was honest. He rubbed his hands together nervously. Melissa wanted to come today. I figured. She didn't think you'd want to see her. She's right. Another long silence settled over the room. Finally, I stood and walked to the kitchen drawer. Inside was the spare house key she'd been using. I placed it on the table. I'll need every copy of my new key to stay exactly where it belongs. You'll get it. And from now on, I looked directly at my son. If either of you need something that belongs to me. He nodded before I even finished. We ask first. Exactly. For the first time since he arrived, I saw a faint smile. Not because anything was funny. Because he finally understood. Before leaving, he stopped at the front door. Dad. Yes. I'm really sorry. This time. I believed him. After he drove away, I watched his car disappear around the corner. Then I looked back at my truck sitting safely in my driveway. The whole situation could have been avoided with one simple phone call on Friday morning. One sentence. Robert, may I borrow your truck? If Melissa had asked, I probably would have said yes. Instead, she assumed. And assumptions have consequences. I locked the front door, set my new keys on the kitchen counter, and finally felt like my house belonged entirely to me again. But I still had no idea that the biggest surprise of this entire situation would arrive just 2 days later, and it would change my son's marriage in a way none of us expected. 2 days after Eric came to my house, Officer Martinez called me. I was in the garage installing the steering wheel lock when my phone started vibrating on the workbench. Mr. Hale? Yes. This is Officer Martinez. I need to clarify something from the statements we collected Monday morning. I stopped what I was doing. What kind of clarification? There was a short pause. Your daughter-in-law stated that you gave her verbal permission to use the truck on Friday. For a moment, I said nothing. I simply stood there with one hand resting on the hood of my Silverado. Melissa said I gave her permission. That is what appears in her written statement. I felt something inside me change again. Taking my truck was one thing. Ignoring me for 4 days was worse. But standing in front of a police officer and lying about my permission was different. That was not carelessness. It was a deliberate attempt to protect herself by making me look dishonest. I never gave her permission, I said. I understand. I have messages proving that. We reviewed some of them. I have all of them. Officer Martinez lowered his voice. Keep every message, every call record, and every written note you made. Do not delete anything. I won't. You may also want to speak with an attorney. That was all he said. He didn't need to say more. I thanked him, ended the call, and immediately called Frank. When I explained what Melissa had done, he became quiet. She told police you gave permission? Yes. That's not a small lie, Robert. I know. You need someone who understands both civil and criminal matters. Frank gave me the name of an attorney named Samuel Price. His office was downtown, not far from Central Avenue. Frank had used him years earlier during a property dispute and described him as the kind of man who could cut through a mountain of nonsense with one clean piece of paper. I met Samuel the following morning. He was in his late 50s, wore a gray suit, and had the calm expression of a man who rarely heard anything that surprised him. I told him the entire story from beginning to end. He listened without interrupting. I showed him Melissa's first message. I showed him my requests for the truck to be returned. I showed him Eric's messages telling me to calm down and promising that the truck would come back later. Then I showed him the official statement in which Melissa claimed I had approved the whole thing. Samuel leaned back in his chair. She created a problem for herself, he said. How serious? Serious enough that she should stop pretending this was a family misunderstanding. He tapped the copy of her statement. She claimed permission. Your messages show the opposite. You asked for the vehicle back repeatedly, and both she and your son acknowledge that. What can I do? You have several options. He explained them one by one. I could leave the matter entirely to the district attorney. I could pursue reimbursement for any towing, storage, legal, or administrative costs connected to the unauthorized use. Or I could send a formal demand letter that documented everything and gave Melissa one final opportunity to resolve the financial part before further civil action. I chose the letter, not because I wanted to destroy her. I wanted her to read the facts laid out in front of her, with no jokes, no excuses, and no one available to soften the truth. Samuel prepared the letter that same day. Included the complete timeline, the missing truck, the repeated requests, the broken promises, the police recovery, the false claim of permission. It also demanded repayment of $2,430 in towing, storage, processing, and legal expenses within 14 days. Attached to the letter were copies of Melissa's statement and the text messages that directly contradicted it. Samuel sent the package by certified mail. The next afternoon, Eric called me. His voice sounded different again. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "Dad, I read the letter. I assumed you would. Melissa told me you had said she could take the truck." I closed my eyes. There it was. She had lied to him too. "Did that make sense to you?" I asked. "At the time, yes. Even after I texted you asking where my truck was?" He didn't answer. "Even after I told you she had taken it without asking?" Silence. "Even after I demanded that it be returned?" I should have realized. "Yes." I wanted to believe her. "I understand that." He breathed heavily into the phone. "She says she panicked when the police stopped her. That doesn't make the statement true." "No. It just explains why she lied." Eric stayed quiet. Then he said something I had not expected. "I don't know if I can trust her right now." That sentence carried more pain than anger. I felt sorry for my son. Not because he had been innocent. He had helped dismiss me all weekend. But he had also discovered that his wife had manipulated him. "Eric, what happens between you and Melissa is your business." "I know. But you need to decide whether this was one frightened lie or part of a larger pattern." He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he whispered, "I think that's what scares me." The payment arrived 11 days later. A certified envelope from Eric and Melissa's address. Inside was a cashier's check for the full amount. No note. No apology. Just the money. I took a photograph of it and sent it to Samuel. He replied, "Payment received. Keep a copy for your records." The district attorney reviewed the false statement separately. Melissa was offered a diversion agreement rather than a formal prosecution. She had to acknowledge that her statement had been inaccurate, complete a probationary period, and attend a decision-making course. There was no jail time. I had never wanted that. But there was now an official record proving that the truth mattered. About a month later, Eric asked me to meet him for dinner. We went to a small Mexican restaurant near the university, a place we had visited since he was a teenager. For most of the evening, we avoided the subject. We talked about work, his sons, football, my upcoming medical tests. Then, near the end of the meal, Eric placed his fork down. "Dad, I want you to know something." I waited. "I understand why you reported the truck." I gave a small nod. "And I understand why you went to an attorney. That means a lot. I told Melissa that if she ever takes something from you again, lies about you again, or tries to make me choose between her story and obvious facts, I will not automatically defend her." I looked at my son for a long moment. That's all I ever wanted.